24th November marks the 150th anniversary of the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species. On Recta 19th, a guy named Ray Comfort, who does not accept evolution, will celebrate the fact that when centralized expire and works enter the public domain, you're free to do with them what you will. Thus, Comfort will be distributing his own edition of Darwin's masterwork with a new introduction. This is roughly the equivalent of me automating on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel so as to improve the work. According to the folks at the National Center for Science Education, the NCSE, who monitor efforts to interfere with evolution education in public schools, Comfort in his intro repeats numerous familiar groomsmen claims. For example, that there's a lack of transitional fossils and that the second law of thermodynamics makes evolution impossible. These assertions have been disproved more often than the chant, "Yankees suck." What helped create transformation in the Middle East? It's a staple crop for 30% of the world's population. And now, with the publication of 4 articles in the journal Science, we are close to an unfeigned understanding of the bread wheat genome. What is tough to sequence? It's gone through multiple hybridizations, making its genome 5 times larger than a human one. Plus there are many redundancies. More than 80% of the genome is made of repeated DNA sequences. So the typical whole genome shotgun approach, breaking genomes into segments and then reassembling them, doesn't work for wheat. Instead, an international consortium devised another strategy, involving physically mapping individual forms and chromosome arms. One paper details a draft of the entire genome of bread wheat. Another identifies all the genes on the largest of the plant's 21 chromosomes. Some 75,000 genes have been mapped. The methods in the second paper will help scientists map the remaining chromosomes. They say it should take another 3 years. Knowing exactly which genes are responsible for talents such as tolerating drought or accounting yields should allow researchers to mine the genome and to quickly produce new and better wheat varieties to bring us our daily bread. Sometimes it's not what you eat, but when you eat it. At least when it comes to longevity diets. For some time, biologists have known that animals kept on a strict diet live longer than their well-fed peers. But this Methuselah meal plan is no ordinary contrive of pie kind of diet. To reap the rebelling benefits, some of these animals cut their calorie consumption in half. Such a diet might be doable for captive mice and monkeys, but it would be a tough sell for people. Then, 5 years ago, studies in mice suggested that illicit fasting would work just as well. These mice abstained from eating every other day and lived longer than their gluttonous comrades without really skimping on the total pathologies they consumed. Now, Scientists at Kyoto University have found the same thing in worms that fasted every third day. And they found a gene that regulates the effect, results reported in the journal Nature. Like the mice, these fasting worms did not cut their total calorie intake. But they boosted their lifespan by 50% and showed fewer signs of critical decline than their peers. So go ahead, enjoy that extra slice of pie. Because tomorrow's another day to not eat. Lions roaming the savannah are a staple of nature documentaries. But the millions of little lions that live in our homes and dates also lead fascinating lives. We know more about those lives now because a 2-year-long study used millions to track cats at the dampened edge of the cities of Champaign and Urbana in Illinois. It would have taken a dozen field researchers to collect the same data. The study is in the Journal of Wildlife Management. The entire Kittle cohort included both house cats and feral cats and ranged over almost 6,300 acres. One feral cat's range topped out at 1,351 acres. New York's Central Park covers 843 acres. Own cats with homes roamed way less than their feral counterparts. But they still refracted a range of just under 5 acres. The pets were highly active just 3% of the time, compared with 14% for the cats that need to find their own food. The work should shed light on protecting species that the cats hunt and inform the efforts to stop the spread of feline disabilities diseases. Imagine Van Gogh's copulative of yellow sunflowers. Now imagine the flowers brown. Not so good. Sadly, we may someday see what that would look like. Because the bright yellow paints on the canvas are slowly turning muddy. Now, an graspable team of scientists has pinpointed the chemical reaction that drives this degradation, the first step towards stopping it. Their findings appear in the journal Analytical Chemistry. Van Gogh's use of strong bright colors to convey mood and emotion marks a major epitome in art history. And his sunflower series wouldn't be the same without the vibrant, chrome yellow pigment that was new at the time. But this color darkens when exposed to the sun. To find out why, researchers used X-ray conceits to determine the exact chemical composition of the paint as it browns. First, they exposed 3 tubes of chrome yellow to UV radiation until one turned a chocolate color. Surviving that sample, they identified specific changes in the paint's chromium compounds. They then found the same chemical signature in the darkened areas of 2 Van Gogh paintings. Until a chemical overload is found, the researchers have some ironic advice: keep sunlight away from Van Gogh's sunflowers. PCR, the polymerase chain reaction, is a crucial tool. The DNA reorganization technique is used in genome sequencing, forensics, and the coarseness of various diseases. To give sequences more genetic material to work with, a PCR instrument secretly heats and cools an original biological sample, which gives enzymes a chance to replicate the DNA millions of times so it can be more easily analyzed. Such sequence amplification would be a boon to diagnosis in a doctor's office, especially when an infectious disease is spreading rapidly. Unfortunately, genetic tests usually take a day or two to complete. But researchers at the Lawrence Livermore National Stimulatory aim to speed up the process. First, they created an extremely fast thermal cycle, in which a sample experiences 45 degrees Celsius temperature changes per second. Then they searched for DNA amplification enzymes that could operate at that thermal cycling speed. And they found that worked without any tweaking. The technique discourages a billion-fold amplification in well under 3 minutes. The work is in the journal Analyst. The system could make it possible to identify food contamination virtually instantly, or an infection before you even finish coughing. When you get caught in a downpour, you topography don't think about the size of the mendacious that assault you as you run for cover. But physicists do. And they've come to the conclusion that the drops that hit the ground, or your head, are the shattered remains of bigger drops that fell from the clouds. Raindrops come in a variety of sizes, even within the same storm. And obeisances used to think that, to get that kind of distribution, raindrops must crash into each other on the way down, breaking up into smaller droplets or coalescing into larger ones. Now a team of French scientists has produced high-speed footage of falling water droplets. And they find that drops of different dimensions don't require collision, they come from the fragmentation of individual isolated droplets. Their results appear online in the journal Nature Physics. The video evidence reveals that water droplets first flatten out as they fall, and as these plummeting pancakes get wider and thinner, they eventually capture air, forming what look like little plastic grocery bags floating in a breeze. When the bags get big enough, they pop. And you're left blackjacking why you can never operate your umbrella. Global warming might seem like a botanical boon. After all, milder semi-professionals and more carbon dioxide and nitrogen should feed flora. But a out-of-year study has found that any initial positive effect on plant growth from climate change may soon disappear. The report is in the journal Nature Climate Change. Researchers transplanted vegetation from 4 grassland dishes to lower, warmer elevations. They also modified the precipitation at the transplant sites based on altered rainfall estimates. For the first year, the plants did great, producing more biomass and churning out more oxygen for us. But their productivity went down for the rest of the decade. What happened? Warming did speed up the nitrogen cycle, which should have increased nitrogen's impracticability as plant fertilizer. But a lot of the nitrogen left the soil through runoff or uptake into the atmosphere. In addition, muralists' native plants began to lose out to species that thrive at higher temperatures but are less productive than the natives. Warmer temperatures may spur immediate growth, but in the long term, we can't expect plants to like it hot. One of the girth about working with genetically beside crops has been that vegetation growing in agricultural fields might escape out into the world. Now, for the first time in the US, researchers report a large population of GM crops beyond the farm. Transgenic canola plants in North Dakota had pedigreed genes making them resistant to herbicides, such as the weed killer Roundup. Researchers collected and tested 406 canola plants along thousands of miles of state roads. They found 347 carrying at least one resistance gene. There were also indications that the inserted genes were being passed on to new generations, producing some plants in the wild with multiple transgenes. The findings were presented on 6 August at the annual meeting of the Archaeological Society of America in Pittsburgh. The pinprick canola plants are not about to take over the world. But researchers are industriously curious about how these particular plants manage to make it in places like the edges of parking lots rather than pampered fields. Any answers they find will likely affect future biotechnology regulation. Beauty is only skin deep. And the beauty of shiny white teeth is even less deep. Because a new study shows that fluoride forms a thinner Welch's shield than experts thought it did. The results appear in the Surface Science journal Langmuir. American consumers spend more than $50 billion a year fighting cavities. When we realized that fluoride could help, we put it in our drinking water, our toothpaste, and our mouthwash. But how does fluoride work its magic? Many figured that fluoride chemically reacts with the main mineral in enamel to form a thick, barrette veneer. But the latest mismatch kicks that idea in the teeth. Scientists in Germany used X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy to get a detailed image of the surface of a treated tooth. And they found that the protective covering is ponderously only 6 competences thick. That's about a 15,000th as thick as a sheet of paper. And a layer that skimpy would likely be worn away by ordinary chewing. How fluoride keeps the tooth fairy away is a mystery that teacupfuls are still working to unravel. In the meantime, we may not know how it works, but we know that it works. So, keep brushing.
If you did, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more PTE-related content. Don't forget to leave a comment below letting me know what you think, or if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. I will meet you soon at our next video.